Hey everybody, Adam Davidson, RadCast for Tuesday, December 20th, 2022. Today we're going to be in 1 Thessalonians. Here's the word of the Lord. Paul is writing, by the way, I should give it a quick setup. Paul is writing about how he's heard a report from the church about the Thessalonians, and he says that they themselves report what kind of reception you gave us. They tell how you turned to God from idols to serve the living and true God, and to wait for his Son from heaven, whom he raised from the dead, Jesus, who rescues us from the coming wrath, and that's the word of the Lord. Listen, I know it's Christmas, but let me ask you a question. Are you fans of the movie Back to the Future? Do you know what I'm talking about? Back to the Future 1, and then there's Back to the Future 2, then Back to the Future 3. These movies came out in the 80s. I'm a child of the 80s. It's a big part of who I am. Not a huge part, but certainly an element to my upbringing, right? So the story of Jesus is really three parts. It's all the parts, but there are three main parts. His life and death, that's part one. His resurrection, that's part two. And his return, that's part three. So obviously at Christmas, we celebrate his life. At Easter, we celebrate his death. At Easter, we celebrate his resurrection as well. And then we await for his return. In other words, we are waiting now for Jesus to come just as they waited for him the first time around. He's coming back. And so when Paul is writing, he's like, we hear this story about how you turn from idols to serve the living and true God, and how, you're now waiting for Jesus, that you're in this long waiting period, which we find ourselves in even today. Christmas is just the beginning of a long trilogy of events. And it's very important because without a birth, you don't have a death. And without a death, you don't have a resurrection. And without an ascension, you don't have a return. But just a thought for today, just briefly. Yesterday we talked about peace, and today we want to talk about patience. Patience is a fruit of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, patience. And one of the things that eases the tension of waiting, one of the things that eases our sense of how this world is a disaster, and yet there's this promise of the gospel, yet it's not all fixed as we wish that it was, and yet he will return. Like, we're in this tension. One of the things we do to ease the waiting and ease the tension is we serve. We are people who serve. One of the best things you can do is get the attention off of yourself. It's one of the best things I can do as well. So I was just thinking about how in this season of Christmas, where we count the days until Christmas, we also wait for his return. And one of the things that makes it easier is simply by giving to someone else, by doing something else for someone else. And ultimately, in so doing, we serve Jesus Christ himself. So are you serving? And I'm not talking about serving pie, although I hope you're serving pie. Are you finding a way to give yourself to others freely, perhaps even anonymously, during this season? Because, my friends, that's what it is to follow Jesus. We've turned from idols. We've turned from death. We've turned from sin. Now we turn to Jesus. And guess what he's doing? He's serving us too. That's RadCast.